You know, one of the things I really adore about Ferrarese painting is that it's so odd.
Yes, quirky.
Quirky, that's a good word.
I've been working on this little panel by a very obscure artist called Bono da Ferrara. So obscure, in fact, this is his only known panel painting. And I suppose we wouldn't know it was by him if he hadn't put this very interesting signature on the painting. He gives us his name and tells us that he is a disciple of Pisanello.
Pisanello's great legacy was his contribution as a painter of animals. He made the most extraordinary studies of all kinds of wildlife, and I think that Bono is really responding to that in this picture. This beautifully drawn lion, but also this incredibly charming doe. We know that the figure in the foreground is St. Jerome. We know that not least because of the presence of the lion. In the Golden Legend, we have the tale of the lion who comes to the monastery where Jerome is resident with a thorn in his paw, and everyone is terrified and runs away except for Jerome, who approaches the lion, extracts the thorn from his paw. From that point on, they're kind of fast friends, and the lion is Jerome's steadfast companion. We can instantly recognize the figure of St. Jerome also by the presence of this very prominent red cardinal's hat. Jerome is one of the four fathers of the church, and he is responsible for translating the Bible from Hebrew into Latin. It's really exciting to finally have this painting up in the conservation studio, not least because it's such an important work. It's also one of the earliest Ferrarese paintings, and we have most remarkable collections of pictures by Ferrarese painters. So this really grounds us in the beginning of the Ferrarese tradition. Some of the painters from Ferrara to look out for in our collection, most of whom come in the generation after Bono, are, for example, Cosmetura, Francesco del Cossa, and also Ercole de Roberti. Some of the characteristics of Ferrarese painting are, for example, the very stylized and almost artificial attention to the folds in the drapery. Also, often in Ferrarese painting, you find these completely fantastical landscapes, even though they are pieced together from a very careful observation of nature. Ferrarese painting tends to have a very kind of linear quality. These are the most adept of draftsmen, and much of the kind of line of drawing often translates into paint. Really, so much of what we're seeing in Bono here seems to be a kind of kernel of what really develops and explodes in Ferrarese painting in the generation afterwards.
One of the exciting things about cleaning this painting is that these Ferrarese quirks had actually been suppressed in the 19th century restoration, and so we're recovering them slowly and gradually. It's really emerging as a result of the removal of all this 19th century restoration, which has misled us, actually. Molteni was a very, very skilled restorer and a friend and colleague of Charles Eastlake, but he did have this one tendency, which some of his contemporaries knew about and commented about, which was to alter and improve, and they actually say correct the naive inaccuracies of the old masters. In other words, to make these paintings conform more to a 19th century aesthetic. And so he edits it all over the place. So since you last saw this, Laura, I've already managed to uncover more of that sleeve that had been completely repainted by Giuseppe Molteni to make a conventional sleeve. And now we're getting these extraordinary, very Ferrarese bulges in the drapery. But he also seems to have taken against these quirky colours that you see in so many Ferrarese pictures, pink rocks and stones, lots of little pink stones around here, and especially these trees, which in the pre-cleaning are light green, and some dark green ones, and this pink tree that he decided, this really won't do, I'm going to make it into a green tree, and duly did so.
No, this is absolutely one of my most favourite details to emerge, because it's just extraordinary to think about Bono really responding to the light. I think he's thinking about the fact that this is a dawn sky, perhaps a dusk sky, really making close observations about what is happening in nature, and then having this quite imaginative response to it and creating a pink tree.
I'm working slowly down here. We're going to get this beautiful dawn sky, the yellow is appearing, but more of these little clouds that were done with gold and then glazed over with red. This is, still a tricky area. And then just a little bit of the lion. Molteni's contributions are all over this painting, these adjustments, repaintings, addition of gold. But the wonderful thing about Molteni, and over my career I've worked on other paintings that he restored, and it applies to all of them, is that when he did his restorations, he used a paint which probably contained mostly varnish, and as a result they're very easy to remove. They come away with the varnish. Generally speaking, when we're dealing with overpaint and we discover overpaint on a picture, that's bad news for us, because often it means that we've got to work with more complicated cleaning methods, or to spend weeks, months, maybe even years, working with a scalpel under a microscope. But in this case, I bless Molteni for this. I can't believe he did what he did to these pictures, but he does make life easy for his successors, and that he's following the modern rule of your restorations being readily reversible.
Sir Charles Eastlake became the first director of the National Gallery in 1855, a post he held until his death a decade later. As the first director, he transformed the National Gallery's approach in key ways. After the gallery was founded in 1824, for the first 3 decades, it had essentially been a gentleman's collection, comprising only a limited variety of pictures. Eastlake went on to refashion the collection so that it became more of a survey collection. This means that today, walking through the galleries, you can trace the major phases of Western European painting, starting with representative examples of the earliest Italian art, dating to the mid-13th century, and ending with art from the early 20th century. He had a process for acquiring pictures for the nation that was really double-pronged. On the one hand, he acquired works by esteemed painters like Rubens, but on the other, he was also interested in works by lesser-known painters who may have been overlooked in the past, often due to changing tastes or a lack of art historical knowledge. These lesser-known artists could help build a bigger picture of Western European art through their relationships with better-known names, either as pupils, associates, followers, or masters. Bono da Ferrara, for example, was a pupil of Pisanello. The Bono da Ferrara needed to be restored before it could be displayed. So Eastlake turned to Giuseppe Molteni. Molteni was a painter and restorer who served as director of the Brera Art Gallery in Milan between 1861 and 1867. Well, it was at Molteni's studio in the Brera that Eastlake and other private collectors met and had their pictures restored, as well as where Eastlake had pictures restored for the National Gallery. In November 1857, Eastlake reported to gallery trustees that he had given a recently required work to Molteni for restoration. Having had reason to be satisfied with the very skillful restorations of Cavaliere Molteni, the keeper of the public gallery at Milan, and being aware of the extreme difficulty of having early Italian pictures well restored in England, I've directed the picture in question to be sent to Milan and to be placed in the hands of Molteni. Lady Eastlake, who often accompanied her husband on his annual trip abroad, left a lively account of Molteni. He is a most interesting man of about 50, high-bred to look at, although the son of a peasant, acutely sensitive to art, honest, honourable, and the wittiest creature. He is adored by numerous friends who drop in at all times to his studio and can't live without Molteni. His restorations are just what one may expect from a man of exquisite feeling and a thoroughly good artist. We're learning more today about Molteni's processes through Jill Dunkerton's treatment of the Bono da Ferrara painting.
When working on paintings that have been extensively reworked by a previous restorer, it's obviously very important to identify that repaint. Now, I've worked on Molteni before, so I have an idea of the sort of thing he might have done, but it's very good to be able to support that intuitive understanding with scientific work.
I'm Catherine Higgitt. I'm one of the scientists here at the National Gallery, and I've been working very closely with Jill on this painting and undertaking in particular the X-ray fluorescence scanning. We've undertaken scanning twice on this picture, which is quite unusual. Once before Jill started the treatment, and then again once the Molteni overpaint had been removed to try and inform your retouching of the painting. Because this technique allows us to create maps showing where the different elements which relate to different pigments are present, we can actually create sort of distribution maps that show exactly where these different pigments are. And what's really nice with the 19th century retouching is that it's often involving pigments that weren't available at all to the 15th century artist, one of which is cobalt blue. And so in the cobalt map, we can see where this cobalt-containing pigment has been extensively used across the painting. Cobalt's a really nice example because we have the cobalt only in the areas of retouching. This is a 19th century pigment. There's no cobalt in the original, but there are other materials which we find both in the retouching and in the original painting. For example, the gold.
You can put the information from the XRF together with what you see on the surface, what you see examining the painting with a microscope.
What we did find were these areas in the sky that I initially was very, very confused about, because these, at the point where we scanned it, were covered with the overpaint. So because it's an X-ray based technique and you can pick up things below the surface in some cases, I was picking up what I thought was gold in an area where there didn't appear to be gold visually at the surface before you started the treatment.
As I removed the overpainted clouds, which were just as blue clouds with a little bit of sort of yellowish paint on them, I found underneath that there was usually a cloud-shaped hole, but around the edge of the hole there was gold leaf. And at first I was really puzzled by this, and then I thought, I think I understand what he's doing. And I have seen it very exceptionally on other paintings of the 15th century. And what he's doing is putting gold leaf under the clouds and under the mountains at the horizon, because the sun is rising somewhere over here behind this rock and catching the clouds and the edges of the mountain. And I think it's a very beautiful idea. He's put the gold underneath the clouds to give that sort of slight sparkle, luminosity. There is so much to enjoy in the painting. Okay, nobody's heard of the artist, but the landscape is in its fantastical way. It's almost like a children's book with the gold, with the rocks, Jerome himself praying with his beads. And my favourite part of the painting is the lion, who lies there in this sort of comfortable way, rather like a Labrador actually, not the usual fierce lion that accompanies St. Jerome. And with his golden eyes, he's actually got gold leaf under his eyes. Since this is actually the only known panel painting by Bono da Ferrara, it's wonderful to be able to display it. And it also says so much about the richness of the National Gallery collection. If you want to know more about art, click here or here and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you again soon.